Well, everyone, it's time for us to go ahead and take a look at the iPad Air 2 and see how this specific phone holds up in 2023. Now, I will probably tell you just to start off this video, this iPad is legendary. I think this iPad stands a test of time quite well, but I just don't think this iPad is probably worth buying anymore. So just keep that in the back of your head. I will leave some other, iPads I would recommend this year linked down in the description. So you can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of the iPad Air 2, this was, I think, a very, very good approach that Apple made back in 2014 when they made this iPad, because this was the second generation of the iPad Air, but it brought a lot of stuff to the table. And in fact, I think this was one of the longest lasting iPads of all time, which is so crazy. So on the front, we had this 9.7 inch IPS LCD panel. The resolution was very high, 1536 by 2048, very, very high panel. And I will definitely tell you, it was a pretty good panel when it first came out. And even now when I look at it and I kind of mess around with it from time to time, it's still a good panel that even compares decently well against like an iPad 9, even the iPad 10. But again, you are getting a little bit of a different design with the iPad 10. But I will say, because of the iPad 9 generation and because of iPads that basically had that home button, it's made these older style of iPads hold up a little bit better. So I will say that's kind of an advantage or, cool side effect of having one of these older iPads in a way. Now, we had pretty thick bezels around it, but like I said, when you look at this thing on the iPad 9, it doesn't really look like too far off. You also had Touch ID on the bottom of this, which was great because this was the first iPad Air to actually bring Touch ID, which was very cool. And that was kind of it on the front. There was really nothing else going on for it. On the back, on the bottom, you had that lightning port, which was great, and that headphone jack. So with this iPad, it still supported all those cool things that we could do with Lightning, which is great. And that headphone jack was really cool as well. Now on the back, we had the standard aluminum back with the Apple logo right there as well. And I think that was cool. The design hasn't really changed too much. The top left had that camera as well. And that was kind of it on the outside. Now, some things that were kind of missing on this iPad that we pretty much have standard nowadays are things like, some other case support. So if you wanted to have like a keyboard case and whatnot, you don't really have it here. Apple Pencil support is not supported basically on this specific iPad. You're also missing out on things like multiple camera sensors. The camera on this thing wasn't really that good when it first came out. And USB-C is pretty much common on a majority of iPads now too. So those are just a few things that are kind of missing out on this specific iPad that we basically have nowadays. But other than that, back in 2014, this was a very solid iPad, and I was very, very happy when this specific iPad came out. So in terms of that kind of covers it up there. Now, in terms of the camera setup, like I said before, this iPad had that single camera setup. So it had a single 8 megapixel camera on the back, and on the front, it had a 1.2 megapixel standard camera. So I think this was a really good approach from Apple at that time too. So during this time, I think a majority of iPads already had a front-facing camera, which was great. So it really wasn't anything outlandish or anything. But you have to remember, when this iPad first came out, it was pretty much the same time that the iPhone 6 and iPhone 6 Plus came out. So just think about that. When this phone came out at that moment, it pretty much almost had the same camera as this iPad, or vice versa. This iPad almost had the same camera as that iPhone, which was honestly kind of surprising. So you could do 1080p video on the back, you do 720p video on the front. And I do think that kind of stuff is very, very cool from Apple. So that in and of itself is very awesome. However, I will say in this day and age, the camera definitely doesn't hold up too well. And I think that's kind of expected. When you're getting a phone like this, it's not going to, or when you're getting an iPad like this, it's not going to be holding up that well. So it's just one of those things you're going to have to keep in mind. It's kind of sad, but it is what it is. So in terms of the camera setup, I will probably say it's very, very average. I would not recommend buying this iPad because of the camera, but I guess it's nice that it has a camera on the backside to it if you really care about it. So in terms of that kind of covers it up there. Now in the actual software and the longevity portion, this is probably the most craziest thing about this iPad. This iPad got software support for so many years. This thing started in 2014 and it just kind of ended last year in 2022. Could you imagine that? However many years that is that like 8 years? This iPad lasted so many years, it's not even funny. And that is one of the craziest things that I've ever seen with this specific iPad. So from my opinion personally, I think when you're actually getting an iPad like this, or when you're getting any iPad, looking at these type of iPads, it actually does make me, at least personally, feel very good and feel very, very just awesome when I have an iPad like this, because it makes me feel that any iPad that I will be getting will last a very long amount of time. So I think iPads like this have set a really good precedent. Although it's not supported anymore, it is nice knowing that if I get an iPad or an iPad Air for this specific model, it'll last for many, many years, and it might not last as long as this. But even if it lasts 5 years, 6 years, that just makes me feel so confident of buying one of these iPads. So that kind of covers it up here. Now on the performance side, this iPad had that Apple A8X chip inside of it, and it had 2 gigabytes of RAM. I believe this was one of the first iPads, or at least iPad Airs, to bring 2 gigabytes of RAM, and we didn't even get 2 gigs of RAM on an iPhone until the year after this on the iPhone 6S. So this was one of the most powerful iPad OS or iOS devices at that moment. Now I remember owning the iPad Air 2 back in like 2015 and 2016, and as I saw at that moment, like it was pretty good. Like it felt very fast. By this point, I hadn't even had a MacBook yet. So I think or maybe I just bought a MacBook, and I was kind of interchanging between the iPad and the MacBook. And I was just one of those people that I just could never justify owning an iPad or using it every day. But I would occasionally type papers and stuff on this type of iPad, and I had a pretty decent time with it. Like it really wasn't that bad of an experience. So I think if you just look at it from that standpoint, you're going to be pretty okay if you're at that moment, like you're going to be okay. Nowadays though, because of how many versions of software this iPad got, it's just really not that great. It's going to be very glitchy, and the glitchiness is the thing that throws me off the most. Like it is a very, very glitchy iPad. Unless you're doing things like just watching a stagnant video on that iPad or something along those lines, then you're probably going to be okay. But if you're actively trying to go ahead and use this iPad as like an everyday iPad for everything, you're probably not going to be having that great of an experience. So that is probably just one thing to keep in mind. I think if you're planning on getting an iPad, this is definitely not one you want to buy now, because not only is it, not that great of a performing iPad, but it's also not supported with software anymore, so you're not even going to be getting any more features added on this iPad. So when I look at this specific device in the performance standpoint, unless you're trying to just do like watching videos or something like that, it's really not worth getting an iPad like this because of its performance. It's just kind of glitchy. I remember though back, like I said, and when this thing I had like iOS 11 on it, it was pretty good. Nowadays, not the case, and I just would not recommend buying an iPad like this because of that. So to kind of sum up this video, I'll definitely tell you, it just doesn't make too much sense to buy an iPad like this, but I can appreciate how amazing this thing was at the time. Like this iPad just had so much capability and so much power when it first came out, but I will say by the time the iPad Air 3 came out, the couple first generation iPad Pros came out, like those things quickly made this thing feel a little bit outdated. And I will say though, it still looks pretty nice, but it's just not that great of an iPad worth buying anymore. So in terms of that kind of covers it up there. If you have any other thoughts or questions, or if you want to buy an iPad like I mentioned, links will be down in the description. You can get that from there and help support the channel at the same time, like I said before. Hit the like button if you enjoyed the video, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.